Hi, everybody. This is Richard Bolger. Before we get to the subject matter of the podcast you're interested in, let me tell you I have used a product developed by Anchor to develop my podcast. It's free. They provide tools that allow you to record and edit your own podcast right from your own computer. And thankfully, they will distribute the podcast for you at no cost. So I recommend the product highly. And now let's get to the podcast. Hello, this is Richard Bolger. Before I begin, as usual, I have to say my disclaimer. As you listen to my podcast, realize that bankruptcy law, while it is a federal law that governs bankruptcy proceedings in all states, each state has its own property exemption scheme, if you will, way of protecting property for people who file bankruptcy in their state. And that varies from state to state. So my advice or my podcasts here, if you will, are very general in nature. They're intended to be informative and perhaps be helpful to you as you try to learn about bankruptcy and perhaps point you in the direction you might want to go. But for your own particular specific situation, be sure to consult a bankruptcy attorney. Also, know that my firm is a debt relief agency, and we do help people file for relief under the bankruptcy code. Today, I thought I would discuss a topic that is commonly researched online, which is, basically, what is the difference between debt settlement and bankruptcy? What are the pros and cons of one approach versus the other? I have broken down the topics, if you will, into various categories. And the first one I would talk about is the cost of doing one method of debt resolution, i.e. debt settlement versus bankruptcy. And when I say cost, I'm really talking about not how much does it cost to hire a lawyer versus a debt settlement company, for example. I'm talking about in the big picture, what are the fees, costs, and total amount of money you would pay, perhaps. Think about it that way in choosing one method or the other. So in this category, for example, the first item I put is debt settlement programs, if you will, do not stop the running of interest or late fees. So if you're in a debt settlement program, interest and late fees continue to accrue. And so while a debt settlement company may be trying to accumulate money to settle a debt, one of the debts that you may have, interest and fees are definitely accruing on the other accounts, if not the actual one you're trying to pay off. That's not true in bankruptcy. Obviously, when a bankruptcy case is filed, an automatic stay is imposed immediately. All interest and late fees cease. Another thing, in debt settlement programs, the debt settlement company is charging you a fee, and the fee is often based upon the entire amount of debt that you owe, with the entire amount of debt that you place with them to resolve, if you will. And that fee is paid while these interest and fees on the debt is continuing to grow. So you're paying a debt settlement company a fee, and the amount of money you're owing because of the continued accruing of interest and fees may in fact even be increasing. Another thing about debt settlement companies, often they take their fees up front, so that by the time the creditors start getting paid, the amount of money owed to the creditors has been increasing. It also will seriously damage your credit score while that's going on. Even though you're trying to resolve debts, you're not getting any credit on a credit score for doing so. And, let me tell you, if a debt settlement company has one attorney on staff, they'll assert the rights of the debtor under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, to be left alone and for the debtor to be left alone, and communication starts going to the debt settlement company, a lot of times the debtor doesn't really know what's going on because the communication is not great between this debt settlement company and the debtor. Another feature of, well, debt settlement companies oftentimes can work, but you can do this yourself, honestly. You don't need them to do it if you have a lump sum of money. And for example, a debt settlement company, even a collection agent, if you have a significant sum of money, they'll settle for pennies on the dollar. So, for example, say you owed $25,000, but you actually had $5,000. You might be able to get that matter resolved right then and there. Now, the problem with that sort of resolution is not really going to be the end of the story, because you have just incurred in my example there a $20,000 debt cancellation, which is going to be reported to the IRS and is going to be taxable income when you file your tax return. So canceled debt is taxable income oftentimes, if not always. Not always. There are certain exceptions, which is true in the law over and over again. But in general, canceled debt is taxable income. You have to report it on your income tax return. Now, debt settlement companies versus bankruptcy, when it comes to dealing with aggressive creditors. When you file a bankruptcy case, an automatic stay is imposed, like I said, which is a nationwide injunction against further efforts to collect money from the debtor. Debt settlement companies do not have the ability to impose an automatic stay. So while they may be able to temporarily stop some efforts with a particular creditor, they have no ability to stop lawsuits, phone calls, garnishments, repossessions, or foreclosures. Another difference is debt settlement companies typically cannot help with taxes or medical debt. Both of those can be dealt with in a bankruptcy. Another difference, in bankruptcy, if a creditor is overlooked, it's going to be in all likelihood, as long as it was not an intentional omission, if a creditor was innocently overlooked and not included in the petition, in all likelihood, it's going to be discharged anyway. In a debt repayment plan, if you don't include the creditor, a particular creditor, they're not included in the plan. Let's see. In a bankruptcy case, there are two kinds of consumer bankruptcy cases, generally speaking, Chapter 7 and 13. Chapter 13 is a repayment plan. If you are in a Chapter 13 repayment plan, there are ways in which a judge can suspend plan payments, or you can file an amended plan if circumstances change. That's generally not possible if a credit counselor negotiates a payment plan. Another big difference I've always emphasized about the difference between a debt repayment plan privately negotiated and a bankruptcy debt repayment plan, Chapter 13, is that the Chapter 13 repayment plan is, first of all, it must be feasible. Okay, so the court's not going to approve a repayment plan which is more than you can afford to pay. It is based upon your income and expenses. It has to be feasible. It's based upon your disposable monthly income. And if that means a creditor gets 1 penny on the dollar, then that's what's going to happen. If the creditor if you have enough to pay 100 cents on the dollar, then that's what's going to happen. And it at 0% interest, by the way. Debt settlement plans, private plans, are typically just you have to pay a percentage of the debt. Whether you have that or not in your income side of the equation is your problem. Feasibility is not their big concern. Getting them as much money as they can is. Another advantage to bankruptcy over private debt settlement is that bankruptcy can be used to avoid liens on property at times. It can also cram down interest rates and loan balances at times. I've already said one other issue, which is the tax ramifications of debt settlement, canceled debt versus bankruptcy. Bankruptcy, there is no tax ramification by discharging debt. There's no taxable income because you discharge debt. Now, credit score. What about the effect on your credit score? Participating in debt settlement programs will result in a negative impact on your credit. On your credit score. According to Experian, it is, quote, one of the most dangerous debt relief options when it comes to harming your credit score, end quote. That's off the Experian website. Bankruptcy is, interestingly enough, oftentimes the beginning of your new credit score, if you will, new credit life. It is oftentimes the case that when someone files bankruptcy, their credit score has taken a hit and they have a relatively low score. When I prepare my bankruptcy cases, the program I use will predict the credit score 1 year after the case has been discharged. And interestingly, I see large increases in credit scores 1 year later. If you're in the high fives, it's going to be the high sixes. I've seen them go from 60 to 150 points in 1 year, that go up that much in 1 year. So the idea, I remember when I first started practicing bankruptcy law, I thought, okay, so if you file bankruptcy, do you start at zero again? And lo and behold, that's not true. So the bankruptcy on your credit score, your credit report, it will be there for 10 years in the Chapter 7 and 7 years for Chapter 13. But that's just an item in the underwriting process that you will go through when you go to borrow money after a bankruptcy case. You'll see that, for example, you can get an FHA-backed government mortgage 2 years after your discharge of a bankruptcy case. You can get a car the day after your case is discharged. So it's not like you can't get credit. The point of the matter is to learn how to use it wisely and to hopefully avoid having to file bankruptcy more than once. I talked to other lawyers, about this particular topic, and one fellow in particular brought up something which I do very much agree with, which is that a very significant benefit that a debtor gets from a bankruptcy case is like a psychological and emotional benefit, because it's suddenly you have really a new lease on life when you file a bankruptcy case. You really are looking to the future. You're eliminating the trouble of the past and you're looking to the future. And that sort of optimistic approach to looking forward is a great stress reliever. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have, heard from clients that just, first of all, calling me and kind of going through their problems with me is very much of an emotional release. And then when we actually file the case and all the calls stop and they can see where they're going, and that there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's just not an endless stress-inducing problem they have no solution to. They begin to see that, begin to feel so much better, if you will. Let's see, what else can I say about the two things before I end this little podcast session? Well, I can tell you this, and this is the experience of many of my colleagues, that we get a lot of calls from people who feel that they were ripped off by debt settlement companies. A lot of times you're being charged to do things that you could do yourself. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need a license to practice law. I'll hear advertisements on the radio acting like it's a brand new thing that suddenly you can settle your debt for less than what you owe. Well, no kidding. You've always been able to do that. Again, it usually takes a lump sum of money. And if you don't have it, like I said, these debt settlement companies will say, sign up with us. We'll basically take monthly payments, park them somewhere, take our fees out, and maybe one day we'll have enough to settle some of your accounts. But that is an iffy proposition a lot of times, and it doesn't always work. And a lot of people feel like they've been ripped off because they've paid a lot of money over the monthly payments they've been involved with, and they don't have anything to show for it. Because what can happen is that any one of these creditors can just decide, that's it, we're not going to participate anymore, and they can file suit. Then suddenly you're fighting one creditor, you may get a judgment against you, you could have a wage garnished, and then it's really difficult because you have lost 25% of your take-home pay, and you don't have the ability to even hire a bankruptcy lawyer to file a bankruptcy case. So really, talk to a bankruptcy lawyer if you're having issues with debt and you're not sure which way to go. Should you go with a debt settlement company versus file a bankruptcy petition? And remember that, you've got to trust your representatives, and you have to feel that you're being told the truth. And, look at people's reviews online, look at my reviews at my website, www.bolgerlaw.com. That's BOLGERLAW.com. And you can see what people have to say about working with my office. So that's it for tonight. I hope that has been a useful presentation for you, and look forward to doing many more. Talk to you later.